Hello and welcome to our expert workshop, An Introduction to RBAC using Reyrolle 5. My name is Chris Edwards and I'm happy to be your moderator for this webinar. Our expert today is my colleague and good friend, Neil Dosdale, who is one of our PLMs for Reyrolle devices and is based in our office in Heaven, near Newcastle in the UK. Neil has worked closely with the R&D team during the development and implementation of RBAC into our Reyrolle 5 devices. We will record this webinar and make the recording and the slides available to all registered participants. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them at any time during the presentation in the Q&A field. I will then put your questions to Neil at the end of his presentation so he can answer them live in the dedicated Q&A session. In addition, you can also use the chat field if you have anything other than questions you wish to contribute. Please be aware the chat is available in live mode only. Q&A questions will be answered via email if we run out of time during the live session. And just in case you're in full screen mode, press escape to see the Q&A and chat box. Neil, I'm sure everyone is eagerly waiting and ready to learn more about RBAC using Reyrolle 5, so I'll stop talking and hand over to you. Take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, and welcome to our webinar on role-based access control. Today we're going to be looking at cybersecurity, role-based access, and the Reyrolle 5. Let me introduce you to the Reyrolle 5 first. It's the next generation of protection relay from Reyrolle, global brand with more than 100 years experience in protection, with over 30 years in numeric relay protection. With familiar names such as Argus, Solco, and more recently 7SR1 and 7SR10. It was first released in 2019, and we've delivered over 40,000 devices to date. The Reyrolle 5 includes a range of protection devices with IEC 61850 and Cybersecurity as standard. Before we dive into the technical stuff, I want to take a step back and look at why we need cybersecurity. I want to look at some of the threats and what countermeasures we can employ. If we start at the bottom and look at the threats and actors, we have amateur hackers attempting to attack and vandalize and inflict as much damage as possible. We have cyber activists looking to expose secrets and disrupt it in organizations that they perceive as evil. Then we have organized crime and criminals profiting from cybercrime, motivated by pure financial gain. There are cybersecurity extortionists holding data hostage and cyber terrorists intent on causing harm and destruction to further their cause. We hear a lot about state-sponsored hackers, espionage, theft, or disruptive activity that furthers the interests of a particular nation. You would think that international espionage would be top of our threat list, but that isn't the case. We have the danger from within a business. Many companies make the mistake of trusting implicitly any activity from employees or hired contractors. Disgruntled or upset employees working from within an organization to get around this cybersecurity framework can inflict the most damage and are often the most difficult to detect since they have legitimate access to the infrastructure and data. Insider threats are becoming more and more common in recent years. Internal user mistakes tend to be accidental and not malicious. Examples include phishing emails that would trick an employee into sharing their login details. Again, because the employee has legitimate access to the data, insider threats can be the most damaging and most appealing to bad actors. So what tools do we have in our cybersecurity toolkit to tip the balance in our favor? What security measures can we use to ensure our organizational readiness? Everyday life involves taking risks, and we all subconsciously perform risk management, crossing a road, driving a car, deciding what to eat in the canteen. It's all risk management. And risk management helps us ensure that the technology, systems, and information in our organization are protected. As we go through these security measures, you will see that they overlap and dovetail together to give you a defense in depth, a strategy that uses multiple layers of security to protect from threats. Asset management is about knowing what data and systems you have and why you need them. SNMP is one tool that aids asset management, and it manages and monitors network activity. Traditionally, it would be used to monitor devices such as PCs, servers, or printers, telling you when they needed servicing, or if they were running low on storage, or they needed a printer ink replacing. In more recent times, this has evolved, and all network-enabled devices are expected to support asset management. SNMP v3 is the latest and most secure version. We must keep our systems protected. Vulnerability management includes making sure that we have the latest security updates or patches applied to the devices on our network. If you have a modern phone, you're likely to be familiar with this. You often have firmware updates giving you new features, and then monthly security updates to address vulnerabilities. Identity and access management. Control who and what can access your systems and data. We'll be diving deeper into this later. This is our main topic for today. Data security is about protecting our data where it is vulnerable. Laptops, mobile phones. Is the data encrypted? Is the data stored on the hard disk? Is it stored on your network? That kind of thing. By designing systems to include logging and monitoring, we can detect and investigate incidents. Syslog is a common system logging protocol, logging all security relevant events. Like SNMP, it was originally used within the IT and networking frameworks and is now common in Ethernet-based protection devices. Incident management. Plan your response to cyber incidents in advance. Do you have disaster recovery plans? And finally, collaborate with like-minded suppliers and partners. How does your supplier measure their organizational readiness? What security measures do they employ? Now, this might seem a little overwhelming. And where do you start? How do we make our organization cybersecurity ready? Well, the starting point is ISO 27001. It includes the controls and measures which help you achieve information security, cybersecurity, and privacy protection. So that was a brief overview of cybersecurity. How does the Reyrolle 5 promote cybersecurity? Why can you trust Siemens as a supply chain partner? And how can we support your organizational readiness? The design processes used for all Reyrolle devices is certified to the IEC 62443 4-1 standard, with the highest maturity level of ML4. This standard provides a common set of requirements that allow us to deliver reliable, secure, and interoperable devices. Section 4-1 specifically refers to the product design processes and ensures that cybersecurity is at the core. We control who and what can access your devices using access control. Users are required the correct permissions to make configuration changes. We provide data confidentiality, making sure your data is secure and that unauthorized actors cannot access your data. There is secure encrypted communications on all remote interfaces. No passwords are ever transmitted or stored on the device, and all relevant data can be erased to ensure data privacy. Data integrity ensures that data is not corrupted or manipulated by unauthorized actors. Device firmware and security updates are digitally signed by Siemens. Devices will reject any firmware or user configurations that are not digitally signed. As a network-enabled device, it supports asset management with the latest and most secure version of SNMP v3. In addition to the normal event recorders, there's a security auditing log that logs all security relevant events in a syslog format, giving you confidence when implementing login and monitoring policies and responding to incident management issues. The Siemens Product Cert website will look after your vulnerability monitoring. It publishes vulnerabilities and security advisories, allowing you to keep your devices protected and giving you peace of mind. As a trusted supply chain partner, we provide free firmware upgrades and security updates. The Siemens Industry Online Support website, SIOS, ensures that the latest digitally signed software is always available for Reyrolle 5 devices. So we've already seen that access control is part of our organizational readiness against cybersecurity threats, controlling who and what can access your systems and data. But what are the benefits of role-based access control? Access control decisions are simplified by basing them on roles rather than individuals. Users are assigned roles that determine their level of access. For example, a user is not assigned permission to change a setting. He would be assigned the role of engineer, as the engineer role has permissions to change settings. This makes it easier for administrators to assign and revoke permissions for multiple users simultaneously. Rather than bespoke users, we only see a handful of roles being used. When maintaining user permissions, you worry about roles, not individuals. When creating new users, you assign them a role, not a set of permissions. When we talk about least privilege, it is about giving users the minimum permissions they need to do their job or the tasks assigned to them. Now, this isn't because you don't trust them, but it helps to avoid accidents and mistakes. For example, a security auditor that needs to access the device and download the security logs. We don't want to worry that they might inadvertently operate a plant item. It minimizes the risk of unauthorized access and limits the potential damage in case of a security breach. Least privilege helps to look after our internal threats. Security is increased as RBAC enforces the separation of duties. By that, we mean critical tasks or processes require multiple roles to be executed. This prevents any single user from having too much power or control over a system. This will help restrict the potential damage in a security breach. RBAC simplifies user management by providing a standardized approach to access control. This improves productivity and reduces the time and effort required to manage user accounts and managing permissions. It gives us a common terminology that allows people to understand and communicate with each other more easily. So how does it work? There are 4 steps involved with RBAC: identification, authentication, authorization, and access. So the first step, how do we establish the identity of a user? How do we distinguish between different users with the same role? Each user has a unique username that identifies the user and the actions they perform. Secondly, authentication. How do we verify the identity of a user? How do we know you are the person you say you are? The same way we do in our personal lives. We use PIN numbers and passwords. Once a user has been verified, then we authorize them and apply permissions, granting or denying permissions to the user based on their role. And finally, granting user access and enforcing authorization policies, preventing unauthorized access. Now I want to take a closer look at the roles. We implement predefined roles according to the IEC 62351-8. This is probably the most widely quoted standard for the definition of roles. And we reinforce that with security permissions according to the IEEE 1686, which is one of the easiest standards to read and gives a nice introduction to RBAC. So first of all, we have the engineering roles. A viewer is allowed to view the status of the device. They cannot make any changes to the device, so they can view device information, settings, instruments, fault data, and events. An operator performs regular system operations on a device, control actions such as switching operations, removal of interlocking, and changing setting groups. They can also download device data, view events, faults, and waveforms. An engineer will usually make configuration changes, including editing settings, resetting instruments, and fault data. They can also update device firmware and comms firmware. And finally, an installer performs the installation and commissioning of the device. It includes permissions of both the operator and engineer. In addition, they can import and export security files. And now we move on to the security roles we are less familiar with as engineers. The security administrator is responsible for configuring device security. They'll set up the initial security settings, configure the user database, and they can view the security logs. The security auditor has basic viewer permissions, and the main function is to review or access the security logs. An RBAC manager can perform maintenance on the user database by adding or removing users and changing user roles. They can also view the security log. And finally, we have the admin user, who has permissions to all actions on the device. And this role should be used sparingly and with great care, as this goes against the least privilege principle. So what are the benefits to you, and why should you choose the Reyrolle 5 with RBAC? We believe it has an easy and intuitive design in line with the ethos of Reyrolle products. We allow for flexible user configuration. You configure one device and then reuse your security configuration on many devices, saving you time. We offer a simple workflow for configuring devices. The security configuration is separate from the device configuration and parameterization. This allows your engineers to do their job. If you don't have security experts, then we have an easy users function that allows you to quickly and easily configure RBAC. No further tools or licenses are required. RBAC is configured using a web user interface. This web user interface is used the familiar interfaces found on other Siemens products. We have secure access and secure configuration using user-specific logins and passwords. So now we've discussed the landscape. The remainder of this webinar will focus on the technical side of using and configuring RBAC on the Reyrolle 5. So what does the device look like, and how has it changed once RBAC is enabled? Well, all the security-related actions on the device are controlled by RBAC via remote or local access. When working remotely, we mean using Radius Manager 2, the web user interface, or the EM100 homepage. Common tasks include changing configuration, uploading new firmware, downloading events, viewing the security log. As we talked about earlier, the RBAC steps, a user must be identified, authenticated, and authorized before they are granted permissions to perform an action. So the user is prompted to log in and will enter username and password before their permissions granted. We have some screenshots here for Radius Manager, the web user interface, and the EM100 homepage. When we talk about local access for RBAC, we mean accessing the device via the local fascia, using the keypad, and viewing the LCD. Again, the user must log in before permissions are granted, and this logon requires a username and a PIN. Menus and settings that the user do not have permissions to are displayed in grey and are disabled, as you can see in the pictures on the main menu. So for many engineers, there are little changes in the workflow. But how do we set up and configure RBAC? So I'll want to look at the workflow a little bit here on how you set it up. The Reyrolle 5 uses local device authentication that allows us to configure the security for the first device and then use it on multiple other devices. So here we can see the example overview workflow. Configuring the first device is a simple process as there's no further tools required. You would log into the web user interface, you create your admin account, you configure your security settings, configure the user database, and then you would export your security file. And in a few minutes, you have your first device configured. For subsequent devices, you only have to log into the web user interface and import the security file. Within seconds, the security is configured for that device. This workflow is simple and efficient and saves you engineering time. And now we'll break down these steps a little closer and in a little more detail. For anyone unfamiliar with the Reyrolle 5 devices, we support a web browser user interface called the Web UI. You can use it to view instruments, view parameterization, I/O mappings, and events. And now we can also use it to set up and configure the RBAC security settings. We access the Web UI via the front USB ports or the rear Ethernet ports. You'd enter the IP address of the port in the address bar on your web browser. The front USB has a fixed IP address, 192.168.2.1. If you're using the rear port, then you would use the IP address that was configured in Radius Manager, Syscon. Devices do not come configured from the factory, so the rear IP address won't be set. Devices from the factory also do not have any passwords set, so the password is left blank. If you've upgraded a device and now has RBAC, you could have a connection password that is set. At that point, to log into the Web UI, you would use that connection password. When we enable RBAC, any existing connection password, maintenance password, or confirmation IDs will be disabled. And once you're logged in, you will be presented with a set of tiles shown here. The one we're interested in is the security settings. The security tile is used to configure the security settings. We enable RBAC by clicking the RBAC switch. And now we configure the security settings. If a user has too many failed logins, then the device will prevent the user from logging in for a period of time. There are several settings that configure these login settings. The max attempts count is the number of consecutive failed login attempts allowed before the user is blocked. Max attempts period is a period over which the login attempts are allowed. And the failed logins period controls how long the user is blocked for. When the user logs in remotely, a session is created. While they are active, the session is extended. Once they become inactive, the session expires and they are automatically logged out. The session settings can be used to configure the sessions. The session timeout period is the time that the user will be automatically logged out of after a period of inactivity. The number of sessions is the number of simultaneous remote sessions allowed, allowing multiple users to be logged in and accessing the device. Then we set up the admin password. The admin user is fixed and cannot be disabled, deleted, or assigned other roles. Once we enter the password, remember to save the changes, and we have to log in as the admin user to start editing users. But before we jump into editing users, I just want to cover the Easy Users function at the bottom of the settings here. The Easy Users function is used to quickly create a default RBAC security configuration. It reduces the complexity and worry for a user that is new to RBAC. It creates a set of default users with a user based on each predefined role in the IEC 62351-8, as we discussed earlier. The passwords and PINs have default values, and it is recommended to change them when using the RBAC users function. The Easy Users function is turned off by default, and the users will not be created until the function is enabled. So Easy Users can be used where a simple but robust role-based access control is required. The RBAC user tile allows user management and user database access. User management includes adding, changing, or deleting users. Each user is assigned a username and a password or PIN, an expiry date, and a set of roles that they are authorized to perform. If the user expiry date has passed, then the user cannot log in. And when managing users, we have two types of user. We have remote users who can access the device via the front USB port or via the rear Ethernet ports. They log in with the username and a password. And the other user is the HMI or local user that accesses the device via the fascia using the keypad and LCD. They have a local username and a 6-digit PIN to log in and simplify access. When viewing the user database, the local users have an HMI prefix to allow you to differentiate between users. And that's how we configure the users and the user database. We've now configured the security on our first device. Now we want to export the security configuration. The export makes it easier to share the security from one device to many other devices. This is going to save time when you have multiple devices to configure. When we export a security file, we include all the security settings, the user database from the device. To perform an export, we select the security tile, export security tile on the main page of the web UI. We are asked to create a unique password and a validity period for the security file. Then we're prompted to save the security file. The security file can only be used if the password is known and the date is valid. The date within the security file is encrypted, and no passwords are stored within the file. Now we have our security file. It contains all the RBAC settings and user database. We use the import function to set up additional devices very quickly. When we import the security file, all the settings and user database are configured using that imported file. To import the security file to an unconfigured device, we first connect to the front USB port and log into the web UI using the blank password. We click the import security tile, you can see here. Providing the password is correct and the date of the security file is valid, then the security will be imported into the device. And that's it. The security of the device is now configured. You can use this same process when you wish to update security settings or make changes to the user database. If RBAC is no longer required, then it can be disabled in the security setting page. This will disable all RBAC security on the device. The security settings and user database are not erased or reset. So when RBAC is re-enabled, all the settings have been remembered. This might be helpful during a prolonged maintenance period or during commissioning, when many changes are being made, and turning off security will save time. Now, this isn't something that we would recommend, but we have provided this flexibility to help you work in a way that suits you best. If you are locked out of the device and require access, perhaps there's no users available on site in an emergency, it's possible to perform a recovery and gain access to the device. A recovery will turn off the RBAC security, but unlike the disable function, it will erase all the security settings and the user database. The device configuration will remain, but any RBAC security will be reset to its factory state. This action can only be performed locally via fascia, keypad, and LCD. To perform the recovery, we access the main menu and go to the login screen. Select the predefined user, recovery, from the list of default users, and we enter the PIN of 6 zeros. And finally, I wanted to cover some quick tips. Each user can change their own password using the Change Your Password tile on the web UI. When updating the security file, no device is considered the master. You can export a security file from any device. You don't have to remember which one was the master. The security log provides an audit trail that logs security events in the syslog format. With the inclusion of RBAC, it's been updated to include the user name to the events, so we can see which user logged in, which user changed that setting, or which event they created. As an alternative to the recovery mechanism we discussed on the previous page, we could create a local emergency user, perhaps a username with an HMI user such as HMI_999. And the PIN could be shared with all users requiring emergency access on site. We can also create temporary users or site visitors with short validity periods. Using RBAC management, you can create a user called Site1, which may have a login only valid for 2 weeks, which would cover the period of a contract. And that is the end of the presentation. Thank you for your time. Before I hand you back to Chris and we go into some questions, I've got a brief summary. Is RBAC difficult to set up? No. RBAC is simple and easy to use and can be configured using a web user interface. What else do I need? Nothing. RBAC is a free software upgrade for all existing devices and requires no additional tools to configure it. And how do I keep my devices up to date? SIOS. The latest software is always available for Reyrolle 5 devices. Security updates and firmware upgrades are provided free of charge. Thank you again, and I'll hand you back to Chris.
Thank you, Neil. Very interesting session on RBAC using Reyrolle 5. We have had quite a few questions during the session, so I'll read each question aloud and hopefully you can answer them. I'll say the initials of the person who has asked the question, but that's all I can see is the initials. So if you wonder who MM or TAR, I can only see the initials, not the full names. Okay. So we'll start with the first question, which was from DM. What is, or do we have a plan for getting the product certified for IEC 62443-4-2?
Yes, there is a plan. It's on our development backlog and it's in progress. Our current situation, you will be able to find, we have a security conformance statement, a self-certified statement, and we make our claims against the IEEE 1686, the IEC 62443, and IEC 62351. They're all covered in that document. It's available on SIOS. It's available on the website. If you have trouble finding it, just email us and we'll help. But yes, it's planned, if you want to know our current state, it's in that document.
That's great. Thank you, Neil. Okay, our second question is from RA, and it says, our company user accounts have alphanumeric characters. Would our users, admins, engineers, operators, be able to use their account credentials to access the IEDs from the font display for parameterization, configurations, operations, maneuvering, etc. during normal and emergency situations?
Our user accounts are secured as well with alphanumeric characters. They would not be able to share those users and passwords. That would involve our devices being connected to the network and the authentication server that you use for your user credentials on your network. And we don't have that currently.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Next question is from DV. How many maximum users can be configured under RBAC? Is there any limitation to the number of users?
Good question. I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'm thinking 32, but I don't know. I'll pick that one up and I'll reply to it, okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Because like I said before, any questions we don't get through anyway, we'll be emailing to the participants. So if there's any, we can answer that one and find that answer out. Okay, next question is from RA, and it says, is RBAC available on other Siemens devices that are originating from other countries like Germany?
Cybertech devices, SICAM devices, they all have RBAC, yes.
Okay. Next question, MK says, Reyrolle 5 configuration software is Radius Manager 2 and Cybersec uses DIGSI. Do you have any plan to make DIGSI as configuration software for Reyrolle 7SR5 platform?
No, not that I'm aware. No, we have Radius Manager 2. It's a free software download. We use that to configure the devices, and we think it works quite well for our device.
Okay, thank you. Next question, in fact, the next few questions are from DV. Would the device raise an alert if anyone is trying to tamper with the relay? Can that alert be configured with HMI or the syslog server?
Yes, yeah. As part of the security login, the unauthorized access or failed attempts to log in, they're all logged in the security log. They go into the syslog server, and part of the syslog features, we can actually export to a syslog server, so that syslog server should actually automatically pick those up. So yes, it's possible, and it's all vented.
Okay. So we've got DV again, and they ask, do users have multi-factor authentication?
No. This is a basic RBAC installation, basic but robust. We expect it to meet the standards, and we expect it to be secure and safe, but we don't offer multi-factor authentication.
Okay, thank you. We have DV again, and they ask, can remote users acting as administrators, can they manage to allow the access to local users or change or add the users?
Yes. So if you use the USB port or the rear Ethernet port, it's the same user. If you have that role and privileges of administrator or RBAC management, if you have the correct permissions to update and change the user database, you can do that remotely. You can do it over the front USB, or you can do it over the rear Ethernet. So you would log in, you'd go to the RBAC tile, you could then add or remove users.
Okay. Next one from DV. Do we have security logs which the user has logged in and what activity they have done?
Yes. Yeah. Oops. We have the security logs. They're in the syslog format and they can output to a syslog server.
Thank you. So our next question is from RA, and they ask, how is the remote access secured?
At the basic level, the remote access, we've got the encrypted communications. I can't go off on the top of my head into the technical details of I believe it's some kind of public key encryption, that kind of thing. It is described in the conformance statement in that document I mentioned before. If you require further information, drop us a message. I believe the information is also available in the security manual for the Reyrolle 5.
Thank you, Neil. Next question, also from RA, asks, what is the RBAC protocol used, Radius or TACAS Plus?
Yeah, we use device-based authentication, the Radius or TACAS. I'm assuming that's centralized authentication, and we haven't implemented that at this moment. The first step is a good, solid, local device-based authentication.
Okay. Next question we've got from FA. RBAC is to be set in Radius Manager 2 or some other software.
Yep. So we've separated the two jobs, as we mentioned in the presentation. The Radius Manager is used for your configuration, for your parameterization of the device, of the protection. The web user interface is used to update, configure the security. So it's two separate roles, two separate actions. Radius Manager is for your device configuration and protection, and the web user interface, so you log onto the device and you set up the security on the device. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Next question we have from DV. Can multiple users be signed in at the same time, or will it give an error message?
Yeah, when you log in remotely, you have the session. Every user has their own session. We configure in the security settings the number of sessions available. I'll just check. I can't remember how many it is. Three by default, and you have a maximum number of 10 sessions concurrently open. So that would allow up to 10 users to concurrently access the device remotely. Okay. And incidentally, you will always be able to log in from the front page. If you set it to 3 and you have 3 remote users, you will always be able to log in locally. There's always space for a local user. When you log in locally, it can only be 1 user at a time. Okay.
That's great. Thank you, Neil. Next question we have from KP. From where do we actually get the security files?
Once you've configured the device, you use the web user interface. You've set up your security, set up your user database. Within the security homepage, there's a tile. We'll click on the tile, and it's export. The export tile will export that security file. It will guide you through, prompt you for the password, prompt you to set a validity period. Awful word for me to say. And then you save it, and then you can go to your next device, you log into the device, and on the front page, there's the import tile, and you import the security file from there.
Thank you. Okay, I did warn you we had quite a few questions, so I'll keep going if you're okay.
Yeah.
So next question we have from MZ. Is it also possible to use a central authentication server, Radius LDAP, or better LDAPs for central users and RBAC management?
No, not at the moment. As we said, this is our first implementation of it. It's local device-based authentication. Centralized management is on the roadmap. We expect it to come along later. It will be a free software upgrade, as all our upgrades and firmwares are, but it's not available yet.
Okay. Next question we have from DV. If we forget the administrator password, is there any process to reset it?
Yep. We have the recovery mechanism. The recovery can only be performed on front of the device, by the local fascia. You go to the login screen and there's a predefined user called recovery. You press that and the login for that is 6 zeros. You press the 6 zeros and then that will reset the RBAC security. Don't forget all the security settings are erased and all the users in the user database are erased. It's very much a last-ditch recovery mechanism in an emergency to get back control of your device.
Okay. Next question we have from SAH. Have to be careful with this one, Neil. Why are we choosing Reyrolle 5 over Cybersec 5?
Right. Yeah. They're different products, different devices and different markets. It's a dual brand strategy we have. Reyrolle 5 is for your industry, your low-level voltage. Cybertech is for your transmission. Reyrolle is generally, we look for a distribution market. So they're quite separate. They're quite different devices. We're interoperable, obviously, but we are different devices and different markets.
Thank you, Neil. Next question we have from GB. Do you have any cooperation or partnership with Fortinet, Palo Alto, or any company which is working on cybersecurity sector already?
No. Basically, at the moment, no. I don't believe we have anything like that in place. It's something we could look at in the future, but we don't have anything in place.
Okay. Next one, I feel like you've answered it already, but I'll still go through it. So it's from RS. Is there any roadmap for centralized user management using Radius or LDAP?
Yes.
Okay. Next one we have is from AM. What if I enabled RBAC and forgot my password?
If an individual forgot their password, if it's emergency access required, we obviously got the recovery mechanism. But if it's a non-emergency situation, you would contact the administrator or someone that had the correct permissions to enter or update the user database. In that situation, they could log onto the device and reset your password for you. Okay.
Okay. Right, we'll go with the next one then. So from SAH, is the software available for RBAC for free for training purposes?
Yes, all our software is free. So Radius Manager 2, the device firmware, it's all free. It's available on SIOS to download, the Siemens Industry Online Support website. RBAC was released in version 250. That was maybe 2 months ago, I think. So that software is available on the website. If you already have a device, you can upgrade it for free. That will enable RBAC. You can use Radius Manager 2 to configure it. And then you use the web UI. You connect to the device using the front USB, rear USB, web user interface, and that will allow you to configure the security.
Thanks, Neil. Got time for a couple more because some of the questions are starting to repeat themselves a little bit. So the next one we'll have is from AM, and they ask, in the Microsoft Edge web browser, web UI, or EN100 homepage, what could be the reason? Is there any settings needed to change in the web browser for web UI or EN100?
So the okay. Why would we use the web browser and EN100? So the web browser and EN100, they can be used to upgrade the comms firmware, when we have security updates or new comms firmware. Those pages we can use. The web user interface it's a nice simple interface that doesn't require you to have any tools on your PC, but you can log into the device using any browser, Chrome, Edge, Firefox, whatever free web browser you need or have installed. You can log into the device and you can see the device information, you can view your events, you can view your faults, you can view your I/O mappings and things like that. It's a nice, easy tool that you can access the device quickly without having to have the configuration perhaps on your PC from Reyrolle Manager, something like that. It's just an easy tool to access information. And obviously now we have the RBAC, it's going to be important to use to set up the security for the device. Okay.
Thanks, Neil. We'll go with one more question. So this one's from VB, and they ask, since RBAC functionality can be launched or configured via web UI, there's a job to be done, scheduled on-site commissioning. Would you like to implement the RBAC setup into Reyrolle Manager?
We made the decision to purposefully separate them, as we mentioned sort of in the presentation. It's a separation of duties, it's a split of roles. The engineering and the parameterization of the protection and the device, we see that as being done by engineers. They'll be on site, they use Reyrolle Manager to do that. But the security for the device, that's a security role. You have RBAC users, you have administrators, things like that to look after the security. They traditionally, they wouldn't want to get into Reyrolle Manager 2. They wouldn't want to get into the configuration of the device in terms of the settings and parameterization. So we split it off, and the web user interface is at the moment is just used for the security settings. It separates tasks, simplifies it, and simplifies people's roles. That was the decision, and we don't intend or don't have any plans to include the security settings in Reyrolle Manager.
That's great. Well, that is all we have time for. Thanks for your questions, and thank you, Neil, for taking the time to answer them. Still open questions will be answered via email, and if questions come to mind later, just contact our specialists and they will try to get back to you as soon as they're able. Access to the recording and slides will be sent to all participants. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll find the Reyrolle 5 RBAC introduction line card for download. As the download area is not visible in full screen mode, you will have to press escape. It has been my pleasure for me to guide you through this session on RBAC using Reyrolle 5. Looking forward to meeting you soon in one of our next webinars. See you there. Take care and goodbye.
Thanks.